The thermometer on the nail by the door read 62 degrees Fahrenheit outside. At 5:55 in the morning, on a January Tuesday near Missoula, it was 23 degrees Fahrenheit. The structure between those two numbers is a corrugated steel arch, 12 feet long and 10 feet wide, bolted together from a prefab kit over 4 days in October. It cost $487. One man built it. No contractor. No concrete. No permit. The man's name is Cal Briggs. He's 36, lean, with a jaw that sat slightly crooked from a break that hadn't been set right when he was 22. He bought 0.7 acres of undeveloped land in spring. He needed somewhere to sleep on site while he worked it, and he needed it before the first freeze. He built the arch. He slept in it all winter. The interior never dropped below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. What he figured out to make that possible is the part worth understanding. He hadn't planned to build anything that winter. He'd planned to buy something. That plan closed fast. In early September, Cal had 0.7 acres of undeveloped land outside Missoula, $500 in a checking account, and a problem that was about to turn cold. The parcel had cost $11,000 the previous spring. 14 months of framing work and weekend overtime. No utilities. No existing structure. Just flat ground with a tree line on the north side. A gravel access road that went soft in the rain. And the kind of quiet that makes clear how exposed you are once November arrives. He needed somewhere to sleep on site while he worked the land. He needed it before the ground froze. That was a constraint. A used travel trailer was the first option. 3 within 30 miles. Cheapest, for $1,200. He didn't have $4,200. A canvas wall tent was next, outfitter grade, rated to 20 degrees Fahrenheit with a wood stove inside. He priced one at $680 for a 10 by 12 model. He had the $680. But Missoula October nights fall into the low 20s by the third week, which means feeding a fire through the night or waking up cold at 3 a.m. He'd done that once before. Once was enough. Renting a room in town was the last option. Cheapest he found, $650 a month, 22 miles out, gas on top, every day. That defeated the whole point of being on the land. By mid-October, he was out of options. The freeze didn't care. So he started looking at the problem from a different direction. The problem wasn't just the money. It was what the money actually bought. He looked at prefab insulated sheds, OSB walls, steel roof, a floor kit bolted together on a weekend. A 10 by 12 model with an insulated floor kit ran $2,100 before delivery. He didn't have $2,100. But even if he had, he'd spent a night the previous October in a buddy's insulated job site trailer and still remembered what happened at 2 a.m. The propane heater cycled off around midnight. By 2 a.m., the air inside was cold. Not dangerous. Cold enough that he'd pulled the sleeping bag tighter and not really slept again. The trailer had insulation. It had a heat source. It still lost the night. Not because the walls were bad. Because of what the walls were made of. When you heat a thin-walled structure, you're heating the air. Air holds almost no thermal energy. Shut off the source, and the air cools in 2 hours, sometimes less. The walls were never warm. The floor was never warm. And a cold surface pressed against a body for 6 hours pulls heat out regardless of how many layers are piled on top. He'd proved that himself. A sleeping bag rated at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and he'd woken up cold because the ground under him had already won. Not an insulation problem. A mass problem. He didn't have a name for that distinction yet. Just the question. And the question was the beginning of everything. So he started looking at shapes. Not at materials. Shapes. Because the shape was the part that didn't cost anything. He was at a diner in town with decent Wi-Fi, mid-September, working through agricultural supply forums, not architecture sites, not building forums. The kind of threads where someone needs covered storage for equipment and can't afford to care about aesthetics. So the prices reflect that. He found a thread about Quonset-style cattle shelters. He clicked it because the price in the subject line was $340. A Quonset hut is a corrugated steel arch. No interior load-bearing walls. No complex joinery. The arch is a structure. It distributes load downward along the curve the same way a bridge does, which means the shape itself is doing the work that studs, rafters, and ridge beams do in a conventional building. The military figured this out in the 1940s and built hundreds of thousands of them because one crew with basic tools could raise a shell in a day. What mattered to Cal was something more specific. A conventional shed has a roof-to-wall joint. That joint is where cold air infiltrates, where wind finds a seam and thermal performance collapses. The arch eliminates the joint entirely. Not a better joint. No joint at all. One continuous surface from ground to ground. He printed the specs page at the library the next morning. 25 cents. The kit came in at $312 shipped. A 10 by 12-foot footprint. 120 square feet. Enough. The arch solved the structure. The cold was still there. That was the next problem. Metal conducts cold efficiently and without negotiation. A bare steel arch in January in Montana is not a shelter. It's a surface that pulls heat out of anything it touches. He knew this from a forum thread, because the same person who'd posted the price had come back 2 replies later with a warning, and then one post below that with a solution. The solution was 2 layers, applied in sequence. First, closed-cell spray foam bonded directly to the interior surface of the arch panels. Closed-cell sticks to metal, adds structural stiffness, and delivers roughly R6 to R7 per inch of thickness. At 1.5 inches, that's R9 to R10 across the full interior, enough to slow conduction to a rate the body can outrun across a full night. Second, a radiant barrier, stapled over the cured foam before any interior lining went up. The foam slows what conducts through the metal. The radiant barrier reflects body heat back inward, instead of letting it bleed out through the shell. The heat source was a 200-watt ceramic space heater. He set it on a mechanical outlet timer propped against the end wall, not for running all night, but for pre-warming, 90 minutes before sleep, off at bedtime. The insulated arch holds what was put into it. He worked out the budget on the back of the printed specs page. Arch kit, $312. Spray foam, 12 cans, $96. Radiant barrier, $38. Hardware and fasteners, $41. Total, $487. He checked the math twice. He had $500. He ordered the kit that night. The kit arrived in 2 flat boxes 11 days later. Combined weight, 94 pounds. He carried both from the road to the site in 3 trips. The second trip, he regretted immediately. He laid all the panels on flat ground before touching a single bolt, counted them against the parts list. 3 panels had been labeled wrong. The stenciling on the flange edge didn't match the assembly diagram. He sorted it out by shape, not by label. 40 minutes. He noted it without particular frustration and moved on. Foundation first. A 10 by 14-foot gravel pad, hand-raked and compacted with a plate compactor, rented for $45 for the day. For inches of compacted gravel. No concrete. 1 morning to prep. Frame assembly. The arch panels bolt together at flange edges with standard hardware. A socket wrench, 1 man. A stepladder to lean each arch section against while tightening. He raised a full shell over 2 days. About 6 hours of actual work total. Spray foam went on next. Panel by panel across the interior surface. 2 coats. 24-hour cure between them. For days. The foam bonded cleanly to the galvanized steel and stiffened the structure noticeably. The arch stopped flexing when he pushed against it from inside. End walls were plywood. Cut to the arch profile with jigsaw. One end got a door rough opening. The door, a standard 32-inch pre-hung unit, bought used, cost $60. That was separate from the $487. He wrote it down separately. The radiant barrier went up last. Stapled over the cured foam before the interior plywood, lining, closed everything in. He slept in it for the first time on a Thursday in late November. Outside, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. He set the heater timer for 90 minutes, stepped outside while it ran, and came back in at 10:53 p.m. The interior thermometer read 71 degrees Fahrenheit. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to sleep. He woke at 4:30 a.m. That had been his habit for months. A trained response from too many cold nights that his body hadn't let go of yet. He reached for the thermometer on the nail by the door. 61 degrees Fahrenheit inside, 24 degrees Fahrenheit outside. That was a 37-degree difference, held across the night with no active heat source running for more than 4 hours. He pressed his palm flat against the interior foam surface and held it there. Not warm the way a radiator is warm. Not that kind of immediate, localized heat. Warm the way a wall in a house is warm. Ambient. Stable. The temperature of something that has been at rest for a long time. Because it had. He kept his ha, 1 degree. 10 minutes. That was the whole correction. The parts that didn't work were next. The door was a problem from the first cold night. A standard pre-hung door is a rectangle. The arch-in wall is a curve. At the top corners, where the door frame meets the plywood, the arch profile pulls away and leaves a gap, maybe a 1/4 inch on each side. At 15 degrees Fahrenheit, you could feel air moving through it. He packed both gaps with foam baccarod and ran a bead of caulk across the top. Helped. Didn't seal it completely. That fix cost $22 in the morning. Condensation was the second issue. First 2 weeks. The interior surface sweated near both end walls where the foam application had been thinner. He went back with a second coat in those areas. Mostly resolved after that. Ventilation was the third. Without any passive airflow, humidity built up overnight, and his sleeping bag was damp by morning. He drilled 2 4-inch holes near the apex and capped them with louvered vents. $18 in hardware. After that, the bag stayed dry. The $487 figure is accurate for what it covers. The arch kit, the foam, the radiant barrier, the fasteners. It doesn't include the door, $60, the vent hardware, $18, the caulk and baccarod, $22, or the plate compactor rental, $45. True minimum all-in cost is closer to $632. He's not wrong to say $487. He's also not complete. And this build requires specific conditions: a flat piece of land you can prep, road access for a freight delivery, and 2 full days of sustained physical work. Not everyone has all 3 of those at the same time. The structure is still standing. Cal finished the land work in March and spent the following summer building a proper cabin on the same parcel. The Quonset is still out there. He uses it for dry storage now. 2 chainsaws, a generator, rolls of fencing wire, a box of fasteners. He keeps meaning to sort. Dry is the main thing it offers. It still offers it. He went back in April, first warm week of the year. The arch panels hadn't shifted. The foam was intact. He opened the door and stood in the entrance for a minute, not doing anything in particular. You might have slept in a tent in cold weather, or in a car on a night that turned colder than you planned for. You know how it's the surface under you that decides everything. Not the air temperature, not the bag rating, but what you're pressed against for 6 hours. Cal understood that before he built anything. He just needed a structure that was designed around the same fact. He doesn't think much about the $487. What he thinks about is a November morning when the thermometer read 61 degrees Fahrenheit, and outside it was 24 degrees Fahrenheit, and he went back to sleep. The arch keeps the weather out. The foam holds what the heater puts in. The surface does the slow work overnight. None of it is elaborate. Each piece has one job. The jobs are connected, and if you run the sequence enough nights in a row, the interior stops tracking what's happening outside. That's the whole system. 61 degrees. January. Montana. $487.